Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, a licensed marriage and family therapist. And while you're listening to this episode, if you're listening to this episode when it comes out, I am probably in the car driving back from vacation. As a Midwesterner, we road trip for vacation. So I'll probably be in the car. I'll probably be listening to some of my favorite podcasters. And vibing along on Interstate 57 through boring ass Illinois and listening to people talk about cults. And it's a great way to pass the time. And, my favorite podcasters don't know my name. That's like a thing I'm pretty aware of. We're going to talk about influencer culture and parasocial relationships, parasocial interactions. Those are two different things as the research understands it. And sort of, I would say the okay, the bad, and the deeply problematic portions of this. There are things about parasocial relationships. Here's the problem. I'm going to tell you up front that those are two different things. And then because this is not an area of research that I am strongly knowledgeable about, it's not something I specifically have focused on in my career or in my own research work that I've done. I read what the difference was, and I could copy and paste some definitions for you, but I'm telling you right now, early on the process, those are two different things, and I'm going to use them interchangeably for our purposes. Which is to say, I understand there's some nuance there, and I also know the way that I language. We're gonna mix them up. A parasocial interaction is again, the difference is in the name, right? The interaction versus the relationship. A relationship is an ongoing interaction. It is one-sided. Again, that parasocial aspect of it, where consuming media from the same figures over and over again leads to feelings of a relationship. Again, our brain is tricked into doing what our brain is supposed to do, which is socializing. Given the stimuli it is taken in. And so whether that's Cheers, or that is Behind the Bastards, or you're watching Smosh, or you love Taskmaster as much as I do, that's parasocial relationship. Parasocial influence is, again, you might know who your local mayor is. You might know the state senators for your state, your House of Representatives, and you see those people on TV, and you maybe recognize their face or their names, but are a little bit more aware, like they don't elicit an emotional response from you. And maybe politics is a bad example of that. Perhaps you are not a sports person, but you know the local celebrity for your local sports ball team. And or you're not somebody who follows pop music, but you know who Katy Perry is. Maybe you don't follow politics and you really follow pop music, and now you know who Justin Trudeau is and you didn't before. But we have parasocial influence. We have parasocial interactions all the time. But those are not necessarily parasocial relationships. Parasocial relationships have been around for a long time. This is a term that got coined in the 50s for sort of the idea of radio personalities, and specifically as TV was becoming a newer medium at the time, the potential influence it could have on people who see the same characters over and over again. It's something that's been studied for a long time, although I will say I did more prep on this topic than I usually do. Usually I'm talking about things that are specifically in my wheelhouse. And while this is not a thing I'm unfamiliar with, there's a lack of expertise that I wanted to brush up on. And a lot of the research is new or very small when it comes to the internet. And which, again, in my mind, the internet is somehow both very new and also, like, it's been around for over 25 years. We probably should have more research on it than we do, which again speaks to sort of psychology being a little slow on the uptake. I'd say most scientific fields are anywhere from, well, I'll say the soft sciences for sure. That's a term that I don't love, but you know what I mean when I use it. So the social sciences are about a decade behind, and I often say psychology is even further behind, right? Sociologists and people who are studying some of those things are more ahead than psychology, although I do think psychology is a firmer science because, again, we are trying to not just note trends and what's going on, but really get into like the mechanism by which that thing is happening. So this has been around for a long time. We have a lot of interesting information from things like soap operas that almost feel old-timey now, in my opinion. That's coming from somebody who regularly cites like Marshall McLuhan's work, which again was in the 50s and 60s. He was talking about mass media and the way that it informs us. So, the paradox in my own brain here is like good research is less than a decade old. And also, some people were onto something 60 years ago when TVs started popping up in our homes. So, yes, parasocial interaction, parasocial relationships. I named a couple, but this is all over the place. This is, I think, as a religious trauma therapist, I think it's certainly something that can be from a pastor, priest, charismatic leader. There's a parasocial relationship. Do I think though some of those relationships are more grounded in an actual, in real life relationship? Yeah, like an actual two-way street, give and take. You know that person personally, they know you personally, but with some degree of disconnection, right? I think something like soap operas, certainly, but like probably more like the late night talk shows are a good example of parasocial relationships. I think fictional work and something like a soap opera. I'm a big pro wrestling fan. Something like pro wrestling has less of that parasocial relationship. Obviously, something that is filmed in front of a live TV audience or something like pro wrestling or theater is done to elicit a certain response to the crowd. So there is interaction, but it's still decidedly one way. Again, pastors, religious trauma, from the religious trauma perspective, pastors, charismatic leaders, that's still decidedly one way. Therapists, decidedly one way. Again, my favorite podcaster doesn't know my name. That's true. And also the therapy direction, those relationships are not inherently I would still say they're parasocial. This all scales in a very interesting way. But depending on how the client interacts with the therapist and how much the therapist self-discloses, whether that is out of building rapport, out of friendliness, or that's as sometimes a therapeutic process, like, yeah, some of my clients know me as a person fairly well, and also none of my clients know me like family or friends know me. You listening to the podcast don't know me in the way that other people do. And it's one of those things where, again, showing up in real life comes with a whole host of other markers in our brains for how we socialize. Nonverbal communication is really important. One of the things that I, as a therapist, have really struggled with is the wrong word. One of the things that I don't like in the rise of telehealth, I don't mind doing telehealth for individual clients. I don't feel like I lose a ton, but I really don't like doing couples work over telehealth. And like, can I do it here and there? And is it sometimes a necessity given schedules and other stuff? Absolutely. But do I think couples work ultimately works better in the room together? Like, yeah, 100%. I think you lose a lot if you're never all in the same space together, because I think that the nonverbals are really different, and there's something different about interacting between a screen. So again, I think there's a grossness to the parasocial relationships that are explicitly exploitative. I think Alex Jones, Joe Rogan, those scale the same way to me. I mean, there are certain podcasts that are like it's outright propaganda or it's outright capitalism, like, right, it's just selling you something, and the only reason it seems personable, it seems approachable, is to sell you those things. And that's gross. I don't like that. I think the younger version of that is less whatever manly masculinity supplements the 5'1" bald Joe Rogan is trying to sell people, is TikTok influencers and Twitch streamers. I think that is the younger generation's version of this, where it used to probably be like, the talk show, the radio hosts, the people who had their consistent times, televangelists even are probably a good idea of this. I should probably do a review of Righteous Gemstones at some point. Note to self. So yeah, I mean, parasocial relationships have been around for a long time. I think with the rise of the internet, they've taken on a new form. And honestly, one of the things we have studied around parasocial interactions and relationships is that they have spiked during COVID-19, and they went back down, but not to pre-COVID levels. And so people's reliance for community and social connection during the pandemic led to a lot of parasocial interactions, and that those have led to a rise in parasocial relationships since then. So again, I sort of started with the okay, the bad, and the deeply problematic, because there's some things that are good. I'll allow for some things that are good. What prompted me to talk about this topic, honestly, was scrolling, I don't remember where, and Alex Horn and Greg Davies, who are the hosts of Taskmaster, came on, and Greg Davies was talking to, Alex Horn was talking about how many people who identify as being neurodivergent reach out and say that they love the show because they feel that there's always a character, there's always a contestant on the show who really comes across as like, yeah, they're neurodivergent. I think Fern Brady is the example that Alex Horn used to give a couple of years ago. Again, this is a more recent interview he did that I saw where he's talking about neurodivergence. But he talks about Fern Brady really changing the game. And Fern Brady is an autistic comedian and just approached the tasks on Taskmaster very differently than everyone else. If you're unfamiliar with Taskmaster, stop listening to me and go watch Taskmaster. Not sponsored, by the way, although I'm open to it. The show is just sort of, the premise is you get a bunch of comedians, they compete against each other in sort of random silly tasks, and it's fun. It's like lighthearted, and there's like a coziness to it. If you like sort of British comedians and stand up, you'll really like it because you'll know a lot of those people. If you like 8 out of 10 Cats Does Countdown, Last Comic Laughing, like a lot of those sort of panel shows, a lot of those sort of same comedians show up. I think Taskmaster is like the first place that I ever saw Sam Campbell, who's really funny. So yeah, there's a lot of great stuff. Like James Acaster is probably my favorite comedian. Is very funny on that. And again, I think hits that like neurodivergent thing. I'm also a fan of Dropout, and I think Dropout is like very, very neurodivergent coded. There's a coziness to it, but also, again, like I think the potential for parasocial relationships are really high. I find a lot of my friends and community members who are queer and neurodivergent, both, a lot of them watch Smosh, which is something I'm less familiar with, but that was an example I gave earlier. So again, the neurodivergence tie-in is that for a lot of people who struggle with their social cues, who have social anxiety, not necessarily just because they have social anxiety, but because they're neurodivergent and there's some part of their brain that recognizes, I don't hit my social cues correctly. Other people think I'm weird, or I don't know how to interact with people in the way that makes them comfortable, can watch some of those cozy shows that have a lot of repetition, but also have some nuance and different. So it's not like you're watching reruns of The Office. It's new and different and updated. The relationship is ongoing, but there's also a consistency to it that is really helpful for some people. And that's a newer study that I found while I was prepping for this. That study was very small. It was only 43 people. So like, as far as research goes, that is interesting. And the only thing we can draw from it is it requires more research, but it tracks sort of what the hypothesis for the study was. And then what they found was that, like, yeah, there's a lot of comfort and actually increased confidence moving into social interactions after people who are neurodivergent have identified and built some of these parasocial relationships. Specifically on the autism spectrum, people who struggle socially have more confidence and comfort pursuing in real life relationships after having some of these parasocial interactions. So I think that is definitely really interesting. I think where, again, that starts to scale right away as I move into okay and bad is like the way people interact on Dropout, for example, let's say Game Changer. You have a bunch of improv comedians who are familiar and have some context with each other, both personally, but also with improv in general. And I think if you're somebody who struggles with your social cues and you're watching a bunch of improv happen all the time, and then you go try and do that in real life, it might not work well. And that's nuanced, I can say, as somebody who does therapy and works on social anxiety with people, but somebody who's also neurodivergent, somebody who grew up and has that lived experience of like, oh gosh, I don't fit in all that well in all that many places. And learned how to fit in to some degree, although never like feeling really comfortable. I had a lot of different friend groups that I was a part of, and various times in my life where I really felt like I had my people, but that was not always a consistent thing. And I think a lot of that was structure. I was in a bunch of different things and having really fast processing speed. So like I could have my nerd friends and my jock friends, and I could hang out with either one, but they couldn't like commingle. But you don't have to have that with some of these parasocial interactions. And I think if you go too far into the parasocial relationship, that probably at some point does become harmful. Again, that's a common hypothesis that we just don't have enough research on. I will say one of the studies that didn't outright say, yo, this is a problem, did cite that I think this was even studying millennials. So people who I don't think of as being that young anymore, people who grew up certainly with the internet being a major thing in our lives, but also like not TikTok and social media. When I got Facebook in college, you had to have an EDU account. So like, yes, millennials are the generation that started with social media, but like we didn't grow up with it. A lot of us had done a fair amount of in real life socializing before the internet became a thing. We didn't grow up with socializing on the internet as a norm our entire lives, that Gen Z and Gen Alpha for sure are. So I think it's interesting, but 40% of millennials said that their parasocial relationships, YouTubers, vloggers, was maybe more popular at the time. Social media people like creators on Vine, those types of things. 40% of respondents in one study said that those people, the parasocial relationships, knew them better than their own friend group did. And like, yeah, that has to be harmful. Like the idea that you might feel more comfortable and connect to those people makes sense to me, but like where we start to sort of lose the reality check that like these people on the internet do not know who you are. If anything, you are a like, and their eyes read your username once and then move on. If you're interacting with a post that has 100,000 likes on it, like there's no actual interaction there. And again, I think as I get more and more critical with this, we'll move into the sort of the commodification of what that looks like. But sure, for people who are socially anxious, specifically, not maybe specifically, and also either or, and also neurodivergent folks, I think parasocial relationships can be really helpful. I think if you're part of a particularly marginalized community, I think those parasocial relationships can be really helpful. We know strongly, this has been researched even better and better longitudinal data, that representation in media matters. And so seeing yourself, whether it is as somebody who's neurodivergent, as somebody who's a specific ethnicity, someone who's a specific sexuality, having representation certainly matters. And that's really beneficial both to cultures writ large and also to those individuals who are looking for that representation. So that's important and super helpful. And also right, can we see some of the structured parameters of a parasocial relationship, the expected outcomes with that don't have the emotional baggage and complexity? There are times and places where one-sided relationships are probably helpful. But I think those are constrained, right? I think times and places that are limited, certainly during COVID. Like, yeah, I wish I'd gotten Dropout and knew about it during COVID. That would have been lovely. That is probably when I watched a lot of Taskmaster. I was teaching. I was working in higher ed. I was doing therapy and teaching. I was never in lockdown the way other people were. I still had to go to work. I was married to a teacher. We still worked through the whole thing. So we were never quite at home the way that other people were. So that's sort of the good to okay. I think there are certain sports analysts or media personalities that tend to, again, play into some of this. I sort of think of like the inside guys with the NBA. It's Ernie Johnson, Shaq, Kenny and Charles Barkley on Kenny Smith and Charles Barkley on, I think they're on TNT. I don't know. There's some sort of contract dispute. I guess I don't know where they are now. But like those people, again, as analysts, but also there's like an emotional component to their playfulness, the way they go back and forth. A lot of podcasts, I think, have moved to, especially if they're media savvy and also do video in addition to just podcasting itself, have moved to sort of a panel where there's, the co-host and then also the producer off screen, and then the producer off screen becomes a character or a regular contributor, because the relationship helps to keep people tuning in. So, I think that emotional connection helps. I think as we move into something that is far more algorithm driven, that becomes a lot more manipulated, and that's very intentional process. The idea that who have never listened to a Joe Rogan episode from start to finish on purpose, that wasn't for research purposes. I will say I don't think I've ever listened to an episode start to finish for sure, because he just prattles on for a long time. I feel that way when I hit like 30 minutes. Can't imagine doing 3 hours a couple times a week, especially if I was an actual dumbass. But the idea that like I know who Rogan's producer, quote unquote, the guy who Googles stuff for him poorly, I've written and talked about that elsewhere, is like wild to me. And what happens when some of that parasocial relationship is, again, like that turns into selling stuff. But there's also propaganda there. If you want to look at like Rogan and normalizing and moving into the mainstream some of the more extreme right-wing ideas that MAGA has adopted, but also like just the misogyny of it. Like less than 10% of Rogan's guests, I guess around 10% of Rogan's guests are female, which like doesn't match the population, right? Like he's not drawing an accurate representation. So as much as we know representation matters, when you have a parasocial relationship and that person isn't representing things, that also plays on you. There's a way where these right-wing grifters and the manosphere type people are using that for manipulation, and they're using some of the emotional component to also keep their audience in tune. So I think some of that community-driven stuff, again, can be helpful for marginalized communities, for people who are looking to connect, for people who it really is only through the internet that they can connect with community. Again, I think that can be good. I just think as we have less and less privacy online and more of our data is sold to data aggregators, and those data aggregators belong to the social media companies, like, again, it becomes far more difficult for us to be online without being specifically pushed a certain way. And parasocial relationships make that easier when we have people who are moving things a certain direction. I'm from Milwaukee. I love Giannis. Giannis working with Kelce is really, really gross and problematic. And also Giannis filming a commercial for Kelce saying I'm from Greece, and then being in the film Greece instead of the country Greece is like, that's funny. Look at Giannis's hair, and what if Giannis was a 1950s greaser? And like, I can like smirk at that and also be appalled at that. And also like that propaganda is working then. If somebody who's like, that's gross, and now I don't like Kelce even less than I used to, and Giannis, who I really, really like, now has a blemish, like, well, then the propaganda starts working. So these parasocial relationships exist with sports athletes, with all this stuff. But again, when we start moving into like extraction, when we start moving into propaganda, it becomes significantly worse. One of the things that we know from propaganda, one of the things that propaganda knows, but we know from studying media is just mere exposure increases people's likelihood. Name recognition increases people's likelihood that they will vote for someone. I think this is a part of Donald Trump, although Trump is sort of an amalgamation of a lot of problems. He is the final result of a lot of symptoms coalescing. But that name recognition comes in, and also mere exposure. If we're exposed to things over and over and over again, it makes it more likely that we'll find it favorable. Our brain likes predictability, even if that thing that we are being exposed to, we don't like. Now, that's not a tried and true rule. There are exceptions to that. The human brain is very complex, and there's a ton of variability. I was exposed to Pearl Jam a lot by our local radio station, who thought it was necessary to play Pearl Jam every single hour for some reason, even when Pearl Jam didn't have like new music out. So like, I grew up exposed, not grew up because I wasn't allowed to listen to alternative music. When I was able to listen to alternative music and was getting into it, and Pearl Jam wasn't a big deal at that time, I still listened to Pearl Jam all the time, and being exposed to Pearl Jam made me like them less and less instead of more. By and large, the way that I experience advertisements is I dislike them for interrupting my show more than I'm ever like, ooh, that seems good. But because there's a percentage of the population that it will work on, and there are certain things that will work even for cynics like me, again, my brain is aware of some of this stuff. I work in this space professionally, and there are still instances where like it still works. But again, if we're really limited in our other social interactions, if we're limited in life experience, like adolescent brains, developing brains that are at different points in their development, and they're specifically susceptible to imprinting. And these people are, online forming parasocial relationships with Mr. Beast or whoever else is relevant. My kids try and watch this thing called Crunch Labs, which I'm deeply skeptical of, which seems like a modern version of maybe what Bill Nye was, but with way more marketing mixed into it, which I really detest. I wish I lived in a country where it was illegal to market to kids. Anyway, yeah, and like unboxing videos. I'm too old for that stuff, right? Like the appeal of those things have never made sense to me, because I think at the time where the internet normalized some of that stuff, I'd already done so much of my socializing in real life. But if you're a rural kid who's queer, neurodivergent, like, yeah, maybe you don't have great in real life relationships, and that online relationship becomes safe and predictable and comfortable, and then we potentially don't socialize outside of that. Research has shown that people feel similar experiences to going through a breakup when a content creator they follow stops creating content. There's been marked dips in people's general sense of well-being and symptoms of depression when long-running TV shows end. That's not just an American phenomenon. That's been studied in other countries too. So when you think of like Cheers, Friends, some of the other long-running ones, like that has a hit. Again, it's interesting where like the internet has absorbed a lot of that, and also the social influence of something like that. I just don't know that the media landscape is so fractured. I think it's really hard to get back to that point. But I think it is like, yeah, there's all these internet figures who are like super famous, and like, I don't know who they are. And the Gen Z kids, the Gen Alpha kids, like my nephew would know a bunch of people who I'm like, I don't know who that is. And I feel like I'm online a lot, like not chronically so, but like as a fascination with people, and also just a ton of different topics I keep tabs on. Like, yeah, but I've always been bad at celebrities. So maybe it's just that. It could be me. I'm open to it just being a me thing. But again, that fractured digital media where, again, I know some of the big online content creators around pro wrestling, and if you don't know pro wrestling, you don't know pro wrestlers, let alone the content creators. So like there's that depth to it. I certainly think something like pro wrestling, if done well, can be like good for the community. If you're somebody who has like a channel that's pretty popular, I think that can be good. I think about some of the creators around like role playing games, like again, Critical Role, Dropout has a bunch of stuff with D20 and Brendan Lee Mulligan running different games and having different casts of characters there. Those are certainly parasocial relationships, and I think those can be like okay versions of community, if as long as we're not then trying to extract things out of it. And I'm not mad that like content creators get paid, or there are people out who like just exist on the internet. I think there are people who add no value. This is probably why I didn't follow celebrities. There are people who add no value and also take advantage then of parasocial interactions in order for exploitation. Let me sell you this thing. Let me slowly work over your brain to be this idea of like, white men are so aggrieved and it's tough out there, and now you're an adherent to the great replacement theory, and also you feel bad about yourself because you're not muscly enough, so now you'll buy my products that I'm selling that are not FDA approved. And like that's the Alex Jones, Joe Rogan grift for sure. And I think that's different than like, ooh, struggling podcaster finally gets a sponsorship, so they take it. I do think there are big podcasters and other media influencers who should be better about who they take money from, because again, I think when you're somebody who has these parasocial relationships, when you are the recipient's not the right word, because again, I don't think they're good for those people either. When you're the person benefiting from parasocial relationships, when you're the person who has the influence, I do think there needs to be an awareness of like, yeah, what you're putting out there. And I think for a lot of these internet folks, like this is not a consistent path towards a career. Or the people who it worked for, I think A, got lucky, and B, probably didn't have great plans. It's like an old example, like the Dude Perfect dudes. Like, I don't know that they're particularly savvy on like what they're promoting and what they're not. And if somebody were to like, listen to this episode and be like, oh, Jeremy, those guys are no good, like that wouldn't surprise me at all. And also, yeah, they did like silly trick shots for a while and sort of went viral and turned it into a thing. I'm not sure how much that happens anymore, but I do maintain this is not a unique idea. Researchers have proven this, and also people who are self-aware, like Bo Burnham, talk about it, who reach celebrity status and also say, I'm got lucky. Like that's all it was. Nepotism plays into it, not for Bo Burnham, but I like Dropout, and also like Sam Reich comes from a fairly famous person's family line. Like, I don't think that doesn't not play into it. Certainly. I don't know, like Smosh and Mr. Beast. But again, it's not like I'm mad that people are making money off of the internet. I just think when you have a certain following, that I wish there was a responsibility. And it doesn't need to be on the creators. It should be on the people who are actually making money, like stupid money off of the internet, which would be the people who control the social media algorithms. I feel pretty good about taking half an hour before complaining about capitalism. So again, like there's nuance here. I think Pat McAfee and other people who have big podcasts, platforming COVID deniers and outright racists and women abusers and whoever else they're putting on, it's like, yeah, that's bad, and you should be better, and people should stop listening to them, and also people who have major followings should be better, and also, yeah, like there's just there's not any accountability anywhere. So why are people going to change? He said, full of hope for the future. And then that like moves into the bad, right? Where like these, there's research that shows like the amount, there's a 1.2 million different facial filters I saw on, I think it was on TikTok, is one of the main social medias. Just millions of different filters, and what that does to people who are watching that content creator, that influencers media regularly. We see it in Hollywood with like plastic surgery, like the Real Housewives people, Mar-a-Lago face. Like there's a certain trend in plastic surgery to look a certain way. There's certain trends in social media influencers who are using these filters that has really negative impact, especially on developing brains, development of what healthy body image looks like, what healthy beauty standards look like. Again, I think we had a like moment where it was like health at any size and body positivity, and then Ozempic came out, and that we stopped doing that, and now we're like back in the 90s. We're like, hey, are we allowed to say something about that person because they look unhealthy? And if we were doing health at any size, we maybe wouldn't do that, but like it does seem like they're pretty unhealthy. So that's not great. I don't know. That's a tangent. I don't want to talk about Ozempic today. Not good, y'all. That's not good how normalized it's become. But body image is like one of the things we've studied a lot, and that parasocial relationships have, by and large, negative impact on this. There are a couple of exceptions to that where, again, sometimes through exposure, certain people, not everybody, not a majority of people, actually sort of build up some, I'm going to say immunity, but that's not the right word, some resilience toward some of that messaging and imaging. But it seems to be relatively based on whether the parasocial relationship is based in reality or not. So if it's with a person versus, let's say, a comic book superhero, and our brains, while they still engage in some of the same dynamics we see where we think we're friends, we have relationships, our brains light up in the same way that we do as we're relating to another human with, let's say, a comic book character or an animated character in a movie or a show or whatever. That does seem to be different. That seems to be, again, in that sort of representation matters more than like we think that person knows who we are. Because it's fictional and it's obviously fake, we tend to be able to do a little bit better with that, which is where I've talked about before, like with something like D&D, where I think like role-playing games can be really helpful for our brains to try out new things and gather new skills in a way that is a lot less intensive emotionally. It's safer and more comfortable to try new things because we know it's not real. Whereas, again, when it's a social media influencer or it's reality TV that we're watching, that tends to be more harmful for us. And so that all tracks, right? Like, I think that research, while, again, even the research I'm citing there is probably a little light on the actual number of people included in those studies and would require more research, what is out there would make sense, where, like, yeah, we know representation matters and can be super helpful for people. Where that part can be good, and also the part that can be really damaging still exists in these parasocial relationships, which gets me back to like the responsibility. Whose responsibility is it? I think the creators to some degree, and also I think certainly the people who are like exploiting massive amounts of wealth certainly should be held accountable. I would love for, saying like teens should be accountable for their online time. I just don't think that's actually it. I think I even hold a lot of space for like, especially parents. I'm 37, coming up on 38, birthday coming up. I think there are people who really judge like parents putting their kids on iPads. Like, again, before a certain age, we know that's very unhelpful for their brain development. Before a certain age, screen time is really bad for your kids' eye development. Don't put kids under 2 on screens. It's bad for their eyes, let alone their brains. For sure, their eyes. But like, yeah, I don't know. It's a relatively newer time in history where both parents are working full time, a majority of days out of the year, a majority of days out of the week, and still struggling to make ends meet. Like, that just simply hasn't happened before. And you could be like, wealth is higher than ever, and like modern marvels, and like I hear that, but like peasants during the feudal system worked fewer days than the modern America does. Again, people who did not own their own land and specifically worked for like a king. It was the king's land and they had to pay taxes and give a bunch of their shit to the king, and the king didn't do anything to earn that. They worked fewer days than us. And the feudal system had way more public celebrations to keep the peasants happy. The idea that we haven't overthrown the system yet is really appalling. Bad on us. Where was I going? Oh, kids on iPads. Yeah. So like, again, I mean, I side eye it too, right? I'm not some non-judgmental person. In therapy, very much occupy that space. In all of my brain capacity, no, sometimes I'm a little judgy. I'm married to a teacher who also has opinions about parents who put their kids on screens too much. But it's that idea of like, yeah, where's the accountability? Well, like, if everybody was well resourced and we had time and energy, then yeah, don't put your kids on screens. But am I aware that not everybody has time and energy all the time? 100%. I have a 5 and 8 year old who sometimes are not safe if they're not supervised. And if I have to work or I'm on a call or working from home, I got a kid who's sick, or, you know, again, both my wife and I had to work throughout COVID. So it's like, yeah, where's that break coming? Yeah, I don't have the accountability on like parents. I think to a degree, sure, but we put a lot more emphasis on personal choice. Should teens be aware of what they're consuming online? Yeah, but they're teens, they're kids still, their brains are still developing, and most of them have little to no life experience. Like, perhaps that's not who we should be saying holds all the accountability. Perhaps it's people who have spent millions of dollars on research on their marketing analytics so that they can extract billions of dollars from people. Like, that's probably where the accountability, a majority of the accountability, should be. And I just think we skip that a lot. Like, again, a ton of this stuff where I'm saying like, gosh, I wish we had more research. Like, the research exists. It's just owned by Meta, and they consider it intellectual property or proprietary information where they're not sharing it. They have a ton of the research. It's just used for extractive purposes, as opposed to just like a better understanding of the world. So that's gross, but not a surprise. Again, like, the other example I've used before that I like to use is like Kellogg's has spent a lot of time and money researching how much sawdust they can put in their cereal before people notice a change in the difference, a change in the taste, where it's noticeable, because it's cheaper to put sawdust in your cereal than to have high quality cereal. So corporations are never going to be doing things that are good for us. It's a bad system to do things for profit. Turns out, I think we knew that. I don't know who's still debating that. Idiots. Any number of the people who I've listed already in this episode that are, again, using their parasocial relationship to exploit people. Speaking of that, today's sponsors. I'm kidding. I don't have sponsors. But hey, if there's that Taskmaster money up for grabs, I would have like 2 local sponsors someday. Someday I might pursue that. That day is not today. If you want to donate to religious trauma survivors, you can do that on my website. Not a sponsorship. I'm not making money off of that. I just think that it's good to support survivors. That's in the show notes. Look at me tying in links and stuff. That's nice. What a parasocial relationshipper influencer I am. I'm being sarcastic. I'm making fun of myself at how little of an internet footprint I leave. But hey, you're still here at 44 minutes, and I appreciate you hanging out with me because we're friends. If you're just listening to the podcast, I looked really creepy when I said that into the camera lens. So, sarcasm. The summer plan for the podcast, as I said, if you're listening to this episode when it comes out, I'll be on vacation. My vacation will be ending, but you know, the plan for the summer is to have more guests. I have a laundry list of people to get on the podcast. It's a matter of scheduling on my end. So it's not like once I get guests, they'll be like, oh, that person finally got back to Jeremy. Well, 100% be Jeremy finally reached out to all the people who have said they want to be on his podcast. not all the people. I get a lot of people who reach out that I don't actually want to get on the podcast. It's weird. Somebody emailed me on my personal email today to be on the podcast. I was like, where did you get this email address from? I still have to find that out. If you'd like to email me, there's a professional email that you can send that to. That's on my website, which is my professional contact. Because again, not trying to have parasocial relationships out here. If you'd like to have a professional relationship with me, that's where you go, my professional website. And there you can donate to support religious trauma survivors. Hooray, we did all the internet things. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Apparently people can leave reviews for the podcast, or if they listen to podcasts. That's the thing other podcasters say. And I probably do have statistics about that somewhere. I just generally don't check. Episode 154 or something like that. We're really over all the internet algorithm nonsense. I'm never going to follow those things, so I don't care. That's how this therapist is taking care of his mental health, not caring about the algorithm, and also taking vacation. I'm going to see some family. Really looking forward to that. We will play some D&D because I'm a fan of that. Do a bunch of swimming. I love to be in water. We're doing a cave tour, which I'm excited for. Down south, going to a cave that has a reference to the Bell Witch, which is pretty exciting. If you're unfamiliar with the Bell Witch, it's a fun sort of southern ghost story to check out, but also a really good doom metal band. Bell Witch. They have 90-minute songs, if that's your thing. It is absolutely my thing. It's something that when I was studying psychedelics and doing some of my own work with psychedelics, I really wanted to be like, I'm going to listen to a Bell Witch album while I'm on some psychedelic plant medicine. And it wasn't bad, but it wasn't as good as some of the other specific music for psychedelic work, which bummed me out a little bit. I will say I wanted to be I didn't want to be exceptional. I just wanted some of the people who have done a lot more work than I have to be incorrect when they said you shouldn't listen to that type of music, because I thought they were just being prejudiced against metal and doom metal specifically. But I wouldn't say they were wrong. But yeah, doing a cave tour. As I get older, I get a little bit more concerned about claustrophobia. So while I'm excited about the Bell Witch reference, I'm a little less excited about being in a cave. Although it's supposed to be pretty temperature controlled. Caves, I guess, temperature controlled. So that's exciting because we'll be in the south and it'll be hot. And get to see some fam, get to go swimming. It'll be a good time. Probably be feeling my age as I have to play Mario Kart against young people. And I really learned that no longer are people who played Nintendo 64 Mario Kart at any sort of advantage when it comes to racing games. So, I'll be grappling with my mortality as you're tuning into this episode. But yeah, so later this summer, we'll be back with guests. Probably not next week specifically, but soon. It's on my agenda, and space opens up in my agenda to actually schedule guests over the summer. So that'll be good. And then later this summer is the retreat. So again, if you want to support, head over to the website. There's a donate link there. And if you're super wealthy, Taskmaster, and want to support the show, and we get more than we need to fund the retreat, which we're not too close to happening, but isn't outside of the realm of possibility of happening. I have other ideas for future retreats. So again, all of that will go directly to survivors. I'm not doing any of this internet stuff to get rich. I am doing it because there's too much bad shit on the internet, and try and be better than that. All right, y'all. Take care of yourself. Take care of somebody else. Go listen to a Bell Witch album if you like metal. Otherwise, probably don't. We'll be back next week with another new episode. Take care, everyone.